Amy is a nutritionist who primarily works with the Tipperary senior football team. She also works in a managerial position down here in TUS. We're in Thurles today for this conversation. This conversation went in very different ways, all over the place, talking about communicating with athletes, staying in your lane, knowing when to refer out, being vulnerable as a practitioner and as a coach. We also touched on GAA players and energy availability, eating disorders, as well as pre-game nutrition, as well as post-training nutrition. So loads in there for you guys today. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do enjoy it, please remember to like it, share it. Amy, welcome to the Petey Performance Podcast. We have had a good chat there in our preparation, but we're after calling you in to the college today to have this conversation. Really excited about this conversation. But what's on the agenda for the rest of the day? And how are you doing today as well?
I'm flying it.
Great.
I'm delighted to be asked to do this. What's on my agenda for the rest of the day? I actually have some work to do, some papers to write. Well, a paper to write. So this is a nice break from the grind.
Nice. What is the paper on, and what stage of the writing process are you at?
So I am literally just tidying up some of my results for one of the papers that come out of my PhD. So I'm looking at the incidence of REDs in endurance athletes, and some of the kind of endocrine effects that can have as well. So it's very sciencey, very boring. But the findings will without a doubt be, they'll be practical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why you're doing the research as well, is so that we have something to anchor our process to, so that we can go and practically apply principles that actually make change after that.
Yeah.
So in relation to REDs and in relation to your previous studies in regards to energy availability, obviously that study was on endurance athletes, but you have studied quite extensively and have experience in team sports as well, Gaelic games. Are there many differences between the two in terms of how the athletes perceive energy intake?
Okay, well, I suppose you are always going to have, with endurance athletes, because of the long slog, I suppose, that they have to put in with regards to training and then the event itself, they are going to automatically have, I suppose, a bigger awareness of their requirements in terms of calories in comparison to GAA. So because a match for a training session might be, maximum 90 minutes, the value on particularly carbohydrates doesn't seem to be there. But at the same time, the requirement for carbohydrates for an endurance athlete is much bigger. So actually, on average or on the whole, what we have found is that neither group of athletes actually reaches their targets for particularly carbohydrates. They all tend to, and now this is just looking at the mean or the average of groups, but they all do tend to overconsume protein. If you were to really think about social media over the last number of years, it's been all protein. Like even sports snacks or sports supplements. You can get everything now from a protein cookie to protein water. There's loads of different. It's all protein. So, it goes without saying that athletes are going to think that protein is the most important nutrient, when in fact it's important. It's a macronutrient. Of course, you're going to need it in big quantities, but carbohydrates are king when you want to exercise, when you want to do any kind of movement that requires high energy. So there are some similarities. The other thing I suppose I found was the endurance athletes, regardless of their energy intake, are all at risk of, reduced bone accumulation. So they are all at a greater risk of having poor bone density, for example. And that kind of comes down to the fact that they mightn't do as much weightlifting. They don't see the value in resistance training. They don't see the value in plyometrics or anything that's going to accelerate them above that minimal stress threshold. GAA players, on the other hand, they will have 2 to 3 resistance training sessions a week. They obviously do a lot of jumping, landing, work as part of the actual game itself. So they don't tend to have the same level of, I suppose, bone implications as the endurance athletes would. So there are...
Even in the female athlete?
Even in the female athlete, yeah. I'm actually... so when I did my PhD, so when you're doing your PhD, some strategies or journeys of your PhD require you to do a kind of an interim oral exam. And I had gathered data on endurance athletes, male GAA and female GAA. But when I got to my interim oral exam, the examiner was like, Amy, you're going to have to take out something. Your PhD is too big. So she said, hold on to it and do, a postdoc or publish the papers at a later time. So that's, my whole PhD is only in males, but now afterwards I'm looking at the female data. So one of the studies I did on the female athletes, and I did Camogie and I did GAA, was I looked at their energy availability. So have they enough calories after exercise for basic physiological functioning? But as part of that, I also looked at their performance measures. So we did a yo-yo test, we did hamstring solo work just to test the strength of the hamstrings, we did CMJ, we did 10 and 20 meter sprints. And really interestingly, those who had low energy availability, so who didn't seem to have enough calories for basic physiological functioning in females, also had lower power output.
Yeah.
So there was a strong correlation there between...
Not really strangely
power.
though, when you think about it, isn't it? No.
Well, when you look at the energy system that jump or power looks at, it's primarily the phosphocreatine system, which is 3 to 5 seconds. Maybe you'll get 10 seconds out of it. So actually you don't use carbohydrates. You use stored energy in the form of phosphocreatine.
Yeah.
So actually it was surprising enough.
But in terms of chronic overtraining.
Yeah. Now that's a different... So I'm very, very, very careful about not mixing up low energy availability and overtraining, because both syndromes are actually very, very different.
Yeah.
You could have low energy availability at any particular time point. So you could have it for a day, you could have it for an hour, you could have it chronically, but it just because someone is being overtrained doesn't mean that they have low energy availability.
Okay, well, maybe I should extrapolate that out a tiny bit in terms of chronic overtraining, but not recovering from the amount of training stress that you've been put on or put under, rather than just having too much training stress. Effectively, it's kind of similar, but there is some nuance to that. So that was probably what I was referring to. And in terms of if you're not recovering from your training session, it's going to impact and implicate your next training session.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
so in
absolutely.
relation to when they're training those maximal outputs, if they're already under recovered as a result of either not intaking enough calories, or whether it's simply, as we put there, doing slightly more training than they can recover from in terms of stress volume, they're not going to continually improve their maximal outputs in terms of power output, which is the bottom line. Whereas those that are putting themselves in a position where they have higher energy availability, they're going to be more likely to consistently have good training sessions, which will then hopefully drive the curve up in terms of their power outputs over time.
Yeah.
So it's consistency really is what I was referring to.
Yeah, no, I know where you're coming from.
And the bottom line is, if your energy availability is low, then you're probably going to be at a higher risk of not recovering from your training sessions.
Yes, and what we also have seen anecdotally, and it's something that we need to start moving from day-long energy availability measurement to maybe hourly or phases. So you're looking and seeing, is the athlete getting in enough carbohydrates within 30 minutes or within 2 hours? And those who are not replenishing their glycogen stores very soon after exercise, are they actually more at risk? Then you could have your overall carbohydrate intake could be fine, but if you're actually, and it happens because players are, their stomachs are not able for it. Their palates still haven't quite readjusted post-training. So like what we do know is that when athletes are exercising, their taste buds become hypersensitive. So for example, they might be absolutely fine to drink Lucozade Sport before training, but actually during a match or even afterwards, it's very potent. The taste is very potent. So actually they can't stomach it. Their stomachs are so tight from adrenaline causing, the muscles to contract. So what happens then is they can't eat. So that window sometimes goes fasted. And what we need to now look at from the research side of things, as opposed to just anecdotally, is if they miss out on that 2-hour window for carbohydrate regeneration or replenishment, well then is that actually going to have more of a detrimental effect than looking at the overall 24 hours or week long, whatever it actually is. So, but what it was also interesting, and I suppose I probably should have been a little bit clearer as well, is the jump height was correlated, but the yo-yo test wasn't. And because the yo-yo test is seen as an aerobic test where carbohydrates are used primarily, you would imagine that if the person is not getting in enough energy, that their yo-yo test would be. But actually what we do know is, and this is where it all stems from, is locomotion or exercise becomes a priority for the body. And that's why REDS or low energy availability is so sinister when it gets to that chronic stage, because you will have the energy to do the exercise, but your bones will start to become affected. Your menstrual cycle will start to become affected, which inevitably may affect your reproductive system, your digestive system, your immunity. There's so many different things that can become affected, but you might be performing out of your skin. So it's really, really, really important that practitioners, and sometimes it ends up where the S&Cs need to get involved in this as well, because if you're looking at certain club levels, for example, where they don't have a nutritionist, if the S&C is working off, in a silo, and I also don't like when S&Cs overstep the mark with nutrition, don't get me wrong, but I do think that we all need to be fully informed of what the dangers of this can be. Because from my experience over the years is that sometimes the S&C can be the first port of call. So a player will have access to the S&C 3 or 4 times a week. Of course, they're going to talk to them about injuries, nutrition, S&C, and really, the injuries and the nutrition is probably outside of their remit. But there are certain things that they can give guidance on. And then they need to be able to be like, well, actually, that sounds like it could be a little bit worse than what it is. I have someone here in my contacts list that I can refer you to who's really good at this. Or can help you with this, and anyone who's worth their salt will actually, of course, they're going to do that. So there's lots of different things that have come out of the research, and I'm really glad that you said, about the practicalities of it, because it's like telling a player you need to eat 1.5 or 2 grams of protein per kg. They don't go into the meat counter in a butcher and
they don't even know what that is.
No, they don't. They don't know what that looks like. So they're not going to go into a butcher and say, hey, hi, can I have 300 grams of protein? Now, maybe that analogy is probably the easiest one, because, okay, you give them out 200 grams of mince and they're probably fine. But like, same with carbohydrates, you have to make it practical.
But it does happen as well, especially with those younger athletes. And when they don't, well, not just younger athletes, but when there is an absence of nutritional knowledge as well, if you tell them 300 grams of protein, they'll go away and they'll get 300 grams of chicken breast and they'll think that's 300 grams of protein. They don't understand yet because they don't have the knowledge yet. So that does come with time. But what you touched on there about having a wide and vast knowledge base of a number of topics, I think is going to become a prerequisite to being an effective practitioner, no matter what scope or niche you're in, whether it's nutrition, whether it's physio, whether it's physical therapist, S&C. And like, if you look at the S&C, you're going to have requirements in terms of return to play. And if you have requirements in terms of return to play, then that is on the rehab performance spectrum. So you've got to understand what your co-worker, your physio or physical therapist is doing at their end of the spectrum. And there's got to be an effective transition across that spectrum. As well as that, you're going to have to be able to communicate with that practitioner. So your communication skills are going to have to be very, very high as well, or to a high level. As well as that, you're going to have to understand the psychology of injury and re-injury. As well as that, you're going to have to understand what the athletes do outside the walls of the gym or the pitch is very, very important in terms of nutrition and in terms of their sleep quality and recovery. So you've got to understand that as well. And for this reason, and these reasons, it's why I don't buy when you're in class and you're doing your undergraduate when somebody says, oh, well, I'm not really going to bother going to nutrition today because I want to be an S&C coach. So it doesn't really apply to me. You've got to have some level of understanding of all of these things, but also be willing to say, do you know what? That's a very specific question. I don't really think I have the answer for that right now, but there is somebody that I could ask or refer you out to. And that's why you've got to network as a practitioner, and you've got to have a vast network with a number of different perspectives, because you don't know it all. And it's one of the benefits, I suppose, to referring out. And it's one of the reasons that over the last year with the players that I'm working with online and in person, we have outsourced for presentations and for regular meetings with members of the NutriCate team, with Tom Coleman, who's a sleep expert, and David Gray, who is a rehab expert, hamstring, calf, ankle, who's coming in this week as well. And that is because I know as a practitioner that if the athletes have questions about those topics, there is somebody better qualified than me to answer those questions. That's a difficult thing to navigate as a practitioner, isn't it? Because as we touched on off air, when you're at a certain stage of the Dunning-Kruger effect, you know everything because there's an insecurity there that you really know that you don't know everything.
Yeah, I feel like I'm so far past that point. Like, as in, not in it, just also like you get to a stage where you have so much else to do that I'm like, that's outside of my remit. That's not in my box, you know. Plus as well, when you start working with an interdisciplinary team, you know, so particularly at intercounty level, we are all there to do a job. And we all have, like, the season could start and you could have close to 50 players to deal with. And you know, they, just as much as their football or their hurling is really, really important, all of those other things are really important as well. So actually I remember somebody saying to me before, oh yeah, I don't really worry about the panel until it's actually cut to the squad. I don't really do too much with them. And I'm kind of saying, but you could have such an impact. Like, you could be the difference between a player being like cut or a player making it on to the 35 for you know, for the training panel that proceeds. But I have always been very much, I'll stay in my own lane. Now, in saying that, I come from, my background as a sports scientist where I specialised in sport and exercise nutrition, but I would have a very strong knowledge base. Like, I did my degree in exercise and health, which was kind of exercise science. I did my master's in sports performance, postgraduate diploma in nutrition, PhD in nutrition, and then all the other things you do on top of that as well. So I don't try and, I don't know, maybe I did in the past, but I don't ever remember a time where I'm telling the S&C what to do, or I'm telling the physio what to do, or I'm, you know, but it's one of my bugbears when, and I've told people, stay in your lane, you know, as you get older and and I don't mean that in age, I mean as in training, in your experience, in your career, as you develop, you start to hone your own skills so much, you don't have the time, the energy, or the capacity to be also trying to tell them what to do in terms of their rehab or their, you know, it's never something that I remember. Maybe I was one of those people, and I know kind of later on we'll talk about the questions that, you know, maybe what you would have told yourself when you were 18. I think I always felt like I actually didn't know enough.
Oh, right.
So I never would have wanted to be caught out in giving information that was wrong. You know, so and that's why I've gone and done all of this. You know, I'm probably going to be in college forever. Like,
well, given the role you have now, I would say so.
I hope I will be, actually, yeah. So, because the day job's great, but, you know, I don't know, but it does happen. And it is a Dunning-Kruger effect.
But what I will say in regards to that advice around staying in your lane, I think you've got to develop the general skills first before you become really, really effective in your niche. Or, not before, as you become really, really effective in your niche. And then once you niche down and you know what you're doing, that's when you can do that to a really, really high level. And that's when you should be focusing on what you can do really, really well. So when you're younger, I would say, because I was one of those that did a sports science degree as well, like, and hadn't a clue what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So one of the really beneficial things for me, I would say, when I did my internship in Blackrock College, was Daniel Moore said to me, right, I want you to be the assistant S&C coach, but you're also going to be head S&C coach of a number of different teams. Also, I want you to do a bit of speed coaching with me, agility coaching. I want you to do some skills coaching because you like rugby coaching as well. And I want you to take this small number of athletes and see if you can help them in regards to what they're doing in nutrition and in terms of their habits, because they're young athletes. So that gave me the opportunity to kind of test out and see what I was good at, while also not making huge changes, because he was overseeing everything that I was doing, and not making or causing the athletes to have any maladaptive habits, and also not providing them with any information that was probably not to a high degree, because we used to have regular meetings where I'd have to present to him how everything was going. So
You're accountable.
I'm accountable. So, but that's very, very hard to find for some young coaches as well, and young practitioners.
Yeah, and I think when a player or an athlete, whatever way you want to call them, they ask you a question, and there's sometimes two elements to it. Sometimes people don't like to not know the answer, but the other thing as well is that they don't like to have a player walk away with no answer. Because, you know, you might say, oh, you'll have to ask a nutritionist about that, or I can give you the name, but sometimes it's the part of you that probably got into the role in the first place was that you wanted to help people. So if a player asks you a question and you feel like you shouldn't, you've an idea of the answer, but you're not 100% certain, and you probably should outsource it, but you don't want to leave the player with that question unanswered, you know, because you feel like you're not helping them. So sometimes I don't think it's an intentional or it's an ego building thing. I actually think it's actually the part of you that has the best of intentions in wanting to help somebody. And you have a fair idea where it is. Like even in nutrition, like when you're talking about honing your skills, like when you become a practitioner, you become, a practitioner in a lot of different areas. But as you, like, okay, I'm primarily involved in GAA now, would have a good background in terms of endurance, have done a little bit on weight class as well. But actually the weight class, if I was working with a weight class athlete like that now, I go back and I'd, revisit all of the things that I've done in the past, look at podcast conferences. I try and stay as up to date as possible. Even as a nutritionist, you're talking about like being a sports scientist and narrowing it down to being a nutritionist. But even as a nutritionist, you actually become more filtered,
And even as an S&C performance coach, like,
so you're talking about speed training and all that. So they're all different elements there as well. Like, you'd have, even in a research capacity, from a nutrition perspective, you'd have people who are really strong in research in areas of the menstrual cycle, energy availability. You'd have protein, like you'd have the gods of protein, you'd have the ones who look at the low carbohydrate diets. So it's gas that the more you know, the more you actually don't know, because you become so, and that's okay.
And I was just thinking as well, in terms of the more you know, the more potential answers that you give to the athlete that are never really concrete. Because when they ask you that question in time, you're probably like, well, look, maybe it could be this. It could be this as well. It could be that. I think, or I believe it's most likely going to be this. But you know what? I don't know the exact answer. So I'm going to refer you out to somebody that might be able to answer that. And if you give that to them and you actually show that you're human and you don't know everything, for some of the younger athletes, it can be a bit frustrating because they're like, oh, just tell me the answer. But the older ones are like, okay, well, look, it's actually a person and he's not fobbing me off and telling me that he knows everything and giving me a blasé answer that isn't actually the answer. And they actually respect that a little bit more, I think.
Yeah. And I think as well, as a nutritionist, probably one of the most frustrating answers that you give anybody is they ask you a question and you say to them, it depends.
Yeah.
Because it always does. Can I eat this? Is it okay to have that? Is this too much? Is this too much? And it's always contextual. You know what I mean? Like, it depends on what the context is. So you're saying, that depends. You know, I'd say if any of the players I worked with were to take me off, my answer is probably always a before it.
I'd say it's the exact same with me.
Yeah, you have to kind of think about it, and you have to give him scenarios when it's okay and when it's not, you know. So I try to keep things very simple when I'm working with athletes. We have strategies and we have systems that we follow, and it's really just to keep things simple. But if they veer off that, it's not the end of the world. You know, we have a kind of a blueprint that we work off, and this is what we do on match day, this is what we do pre-training, post-training. With intercounty, it's great. You have a lot of control over, you know, we have a chef, we have, you know, we've all that kind of stuff. We've pre and post match nutrition, you know, we've pre-training nutrition. Sometimes, depending on the length of the session, we'll have intra-training nutrition, post-training nutrition. So you do have a lot of that. And then it's about building habits in the players so that you can trust them that they're going to make the right choices then when they're at home. Because actually, we probably eat 21 meals, 21 snacks a week, you know, depending on the pattern that you decide to eat and drink. And the players, you might only have control over maximum 9 of those. So the players need to trust what you're saying to them. But they also need to have autonomy, that they can make choices and make decisions. Like I had one of the younger players a couple of weeks ago say to me, "Can you not just give me a meal plan?" Yeah. And the rest are kind of looking going, "Oh, he did not just ask that." Yeah. You know, and I'm saying no, because it doesn't teach you anything. You know, if for whatever reason you're not on the squad next year, I haven't taught you anything then.
You're going to eat off that meal plan for the next 20 years.
Well, actually, there was a player, he's not on the panel anymore, and he came in and he said, "Amy, I've been following this since I got selected for this panel." And I said, "Where did you get that?" No, it wasn't like suitable to the level he was going to be training at, but he told me that back about 10 years ago he had a personal trainer and this is what he was following.
Yeah.
I was like, well, if you really want to eat 10% broccoli for your breakfast, that's okay, that's fine, but you don't
what does he eat? Broccoli for breakfast?
Yeah, you know,
in fairness, I used to do that
the
as well
mad
when I
things
was
that
16, I'd say.
Mad jokes like that, you know, the chicken, rice and broccoli.
And what they miss out as well, and I think I've touched on this.
The fun of food.
The fun of food, but also if you eat that strictly and adhere to that specific diet, which I see probably more so in the male players that I've worked with than the female. Like, sure, I'm getting my veg. Yeah, but you're getting a very specific type of veg for 12 months of the year. You're not eating it, like the amount of micronutrients that you need to, or vitamins and minerals, like, because it's so hyper specific.
Yeah, and then they'll just say, "But I'll take a multivitamin."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, some of them have all the answers, but actually none of the answers.
Yeah.
Look, it can be very, like, I've been involved, you know, you'd be dealing with hotels and restaurants, and some of them haven't ever worked with teams, you know, so you might end up in the back arse of beyond at a match, you know, and you're kind of stuck for this restaurant or hotel who's never really catered for a team before, but have an idea of what they think someone should eat. So you might put whatever on the menu and they'll be like, "They're allowed to eat that," like gravy or something after a game, and they're, "Are you sure you want gravy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure," because they're people. They're, you know, we won't have gravy before the match, but we'll have it afterwards. It's absolutely fine. And they're kind of going, "Oh my God, Jesus." And you won. Yeah.
And you won the gravy.
Yeah, we won.
The gravy.
You know, so
back.
People have this perception that, you know, you have to eat clean. I hate it. Like, so what does that mean? You know, what does it mean?
No taste in your food whatsoever. And no recipes. It's just like separate your protein, your veg, and your carbohydrate, and that's all you eat. Obviously I'm kind of taking the piss and being ironic here, but that is kind of what people think of when they think eat clean, and that's no crack.
No, oh my God, it's so...
Then you have miserable players and athletes and they're never going to perform well.
Well, no, do you know what happens is their focus ends up shifting towards that kind of... They're so obsessed with what they're eating that to the expense of, you know, what, like, their sleep, their social skills, even their football or their hurling, because actually they're so worried about my food and is it clean enough, and oh God, what are they going to have after training for dinner or for supper? You know, it takes over. And they're, instead of thinking about like just their normal day-to-day life, even on a rest day when they shouldn't be thinking about sport at all, they're thinking about their food. You know, they're obsessing because it's something they have a huge control over. So it's very, like, I would also test my athletes for disordered eating. That was one of the findings that came out from my first PhD study, which was 20% of Gaelic football players are at risk of disordered eating.
That's quite high.
Particularly those who are on the subs bench. So they're not on the first 15.
How does that compare to the general population in terms of risk?
I don't know. I didn't have a control group. I just worked within the
1 in 5 seems quite high though.
And would you believe, so I was one of the examiners for my PhD is head of nutrition for Sport Ireland, and she said to me, I guarantee you, she said, that's actually higher.
Was that the study on female endurance, or was it male and female? And was there a difference between the risk factors in male versus female for disordered eating? In terms of, sorry, not the risk factors, but in terms of risk. Were the males more at risk than the females, or the females more at risk than the males?
The difficulty with comparing them is that I didn't use the same tool, because the tool for females hasn't been developed, it has been developed, it hasn't been validated in males. So the first version of it that they did attempt to validate, the disordered eating section of it, was seen to be invalid in terms of how it actually measured it. So I couldn't measure like for like.
Okay.
So there's actually a completely different questionnaire, and it's rated and scored completely differently. So I only looked specifically at disordered eating in male GAA players. So I haven't actually broken down each of the questionnaire that I use in the females has loads of different components to it, and disordered eating is one of them, but I actually haven't done the analysis on that particular one yet, because it's not apples versus apples. So I can't actually do a cross comparison, unfortunately.
You had enough to do though, so we'll forgive you that. But that was the percentage for the male.
20, yeah. And out of that, none of them were in the first 15. So it's I'm not making it onto the first 15. So and they look at things that they can control. So they look at things like, I need to get bigger, or I need to lose body fat. You know what I mean? So that's where all those negative thoughts were all stemming from. So it was one of the most, I felt it was a really surprising finding. But as I said, the head of Sport Ireland, for nutrition in Sport Ireland, was like, doesn't surprise me, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was higher.
In terms of your practice then, to reflect on what we've just spoke about in terms of the psychology of fueling, how many of your conversations, or how much of your conversations, refer back to what you know about the psychology of how an athlete is approaching how they fuel their body?
Yeah, so I would first of all, nutrition is never going to be, no one's going to be fixed, right? And it's not going to happen in the first season, okay? Sometimes people come into you and they think they've got really good habits, and they're the ones who have the red flags for me, because they're the ones who have already gotten maybe some level of disordered eating patterns, often, right? Then the ones who come in and haven't got haven't a clue, that's absolutely fine, because you're working this kind of with a blank canvas, and you're working with someone who psychologically doesn't place as much emphasis, not necessarily value, but as much emphasis on food. So you've a little bit more leeway to try and mold them into a relaxed, systematic approach to eating. In terms of the conversations and how I approach the conversations, so it's very much dependent on, one of the biggest difficulties can be when a player gets injured, okay? So if you have a red flag player, who's someone who's very conscious of their food intake, gets injured, that can be really difficult. I have a really good relationship with the players in that I speak to them every week, 1-to-1, as a group. We've great banter, and I've been with them so long that there's a massive trust between us. So I will have a very, very frank conversation with the player. So there was a player, we have an athlete who got injured, and he was a red flag player. I would test their hydration, their fluid losses every training session, so they weigh in and they weigh out. this particular player had a little bit of a fixation on the number on the scales. So when he got injured, I no longer weighed him in and out. Now I said to him, I didn't take the option from him, but I was very honest. I said, I'm afraid that you are going to become too fixated on the number. You are injured. You need to maintain your calorie intake. You don't need to decrease it. You can decrease your carbohydrate intake, but we'll up your protein and we'll up your fat a little bit so that you're maintaining your calories. I said to him, I don't think it's a good idea for you to be weighing in and weighing out. We already know on average what your sweat loss is, so we can just work off that. It's only for 6 weeks. It's not going to be the end of the world. I said, but it's up to you. If you stand on the scales, it's fine. If you don't stand on it, it's also fine. And he was like, no, I respect and I appreciate where you're coming from. That wouldn't have happened in the first season. He would have probably I wouldn't have said it. I wouldn't have said it like that. I would have been a little bit more cautious. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have been able to have that conversation with him.
You didn't have the relationship yet.
I didn't have the trust. I didn't have it in him. He didn't have it in me. And I trusted that how he was going to take what I said, because it was our 4th season together. He trusted that I was coming from a place that put him at the centre in terms of this is what's most important for you right now. So for that 6-8 weeks, he didn't weigh in. He didn't weigh out. That was absolutely fine. The minute then he got fully back training, we went back to it again. And that can be really difficult with players. That can be really difficult when they have to reduce their energy output, but yet they still need those little extra calories. And if they're a red flag player who's like, I'm losing control right now because my identity as a footballer is starting to come into question because I'm now injured. I don't have an identity as an injured football player. I'm only at my best. I'm only the best person I can be when I'm a fully fit football player. And that's sometimes the difficulty. When they don't have an identity as anything else. They're not the person, the man, they're the football player. And when that doesn't, then nutrition is one of the first things that gets a bit of a hammering, because they're like, well, I can control you. I can control what I put in my mouth. You know, so that can be hard. That's where the psychological conversations, they come in thick and heavy.
And I can attest to that, being a former athlete who did experience injury, and probably when I was younger, as alluded to a second ago, had some of those red flags in terms of disordered eating. But the piece of language that was probably used quite often there, that often with those type of athletes, you're trying to guide them to stop using as much, is I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to do this to put me in the best position to perform. If I don't do this, then everything's going to fall asunder and I'm going to be useless and I'm never going to make the team and that's the end of me. And the more you can attempt to teach those athletes that, look, it's a regularity, it's not black or white. So if we do the right things more often than not, then we're all good. Mm-hmm. It's creating habits that put us in a position to be more likely to do it, but still having a little bit of leverage to kind of, look, I'm going to enjoy myself here tonight with my girlfriend or my boyfriend. I'm going to go and have a couple of drinks with the squad after the game because season's over. It doesn't matter. I can enjoy myself slightly. A couple of, not go hammering dogs, but equally as an athlete, you've got to appreciate and enjoy those moments with the team as well. But it's when there's that black and white thinking in the athlete that they're probably going to flag a lot in terms of being those red flag athletes that you were talking about. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. And I do think as well that when they will also model a lot of their behaviours off what you put in front of them, you know. So I definitely, like the first season, I would have been probably a little bit more strict in terms of the way I thought of it, which did make sense at the time. Was, well, I as a nutritionist have control of a certain number of meals and snacks. So I'll make them as healthy, nutritious and goal orientated as I can. And then at least if they make mistakes outside of that, the damage will be minimized a little bit. But actually that was nearly me telling them subliminally, I don't trust you. You know? So in our first season, we won the Munster final. Historical. It was amazing.
Go on, Tim.
Yes, absolutely. But actually, COVID came in the middle of it. So we didn't end up playing until November, which would be very unusual.
I remember.
Yeah, so we got together in the October. We had kind of 5 or 6, maybe 5 games in the league played, which were like quite strict. You know, you're with the team and you're trying to embed habits and lay down the law. And if you ever met any of the football players, they're probably going to tell you I rule with an iron fist to a degree. But then we had our kind of COVID break, and then we got back into the swing of things. And after, they had just done so amazing in general. The work they put in the off season on their own. Like, you remember, you couldn't train together. They did so much on their own, cooking, training. So when we won the Munster final, we actually weren't allowed to go to a restaurant. You weren't allowed to have group gatherings. So outside of the dressing room. So we were meant to go to this hotel, and then the hotel pulled out and said, if you're not staying over, we can't feed you. So we were saying, oh no, what are we going to do? So I said, kind of as a joke, but if you say yes, I'm going to run with this. I said, can we get pizza? So we got Domino's delivered to Páirc Uí Chaoimh incognito. And well, it was 4 years ago now, so no one's going to give out to me now, but so we snuck him in a car. So we got a car in, someone went and collected all the pizzas, drove him in the car, brought him into the dressing room. Everyone got wedges and sides and pizzas, but for the players, they were kind of like, are they for us? And I was saying, yeah, you give us pizza. Yeah, we're allowed pizza. Yes. You know, so you do things like that. Last year we got promoted, and we knew before the league finished that we were after being promoted, you know, maybe 2 or 3 games left. And it was a home game, which was fantastic. You know, Semple Stadium is just brilliant to win in. So what we did was, our chef, we couldn't bring pizzas in because we have our own chef, whatever. So, but the chef was like, I'll open up the chip van. So we did burgers, garlic chip, curry chips, you know. And now it was so funny because you fast forward a couple of years and the players are like, oh, brilliant. There was no questioning like, are we allowed to have those chips? Are we? Because it's all context. So they were, you know, and it's not that we're treating it like treat food, or I don't like that, all those kind of labels. But it was just normal. It was part of, yeah, go on, sure, we'll do it.
Just reflecting on that, and from the conversation we had earlier, in that my background was rugby and transition into GAA, I see a huge difference there in terms of post-rugby match, players are okay because they know that they've expended so much energy that we just need to get calories in here. Like, it's not that important as long as I hit my specific targets. And also, it's an opportunity for us all to eat together and have that communal environment. Yeah. But it also, I feel as though from my 3 years in working with GAA athletes, the difference in rugby and GAA, and potentially it's because of the higher degree of contact in rugby, is in GAA, from both a player and a coach perspective, there can be a real fixation on body fat and body composition, whereas in rugby it's very much like, okay, we want to get our body composition to an optimal level, but we're going to need a little bit of body fat as well in order to absorb those hits and those contacts. Whereas in the GAA, it's very much like, I'm going to get as lean as I can because I need to get around the field. And, oh my God, I'm not going to eat that after the match because I've just expended so much energy that this is now an opportunity for me to reduce my body fat. But that's not the way you should be thinking of yourself as an athlete whatsoever. No. But maybe, as well as that, having reflected back in our conversation, you have achieved change there in quite a short time frame in terms of the mentality to refueling post-match. So maybe it was just an absence of knowledge in the GAA.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It is. It's just, nobody does malpractice. You know what I mean? It's players or practitioners. Like, they often just work with what they know, and it's not out of a place of malice. I was highly intrigued this season in particular because I had players who had for the long haul. And it's really fascinating when you're going through DEXA results or you're going through skinfold results, or depending on whatever method I use, given what the resources are at the time. But you'd have a player and now he'd say to me, yeah, I'm after dropping a couple of percent. Oh, and I'm after dropping a couple of kilos. I don't want it to be any lower than that. You know, like, we had a player who...
That wouldn't have happened previously, is what you're saying.
Yeah, like, I mean, the culture was just, as you said, you know, it was can I get to single digits? And single digits drives me crazy. I think it's ridiculous.
They want to look sexy as well, Amy.
And you know what? That picture, and look, I think it was blown out of proportion, right, in a lot of ways, but a lot of us in the elite setups cringed, like wanted to just, for Twitter to shut down when the Limerick dressing room, the hurlers, took pictures topless. And even the goalkeeper had the 6-pack. And then you've got the the ones who are not like that in that shit, and they're looking at themselves going, you ever see that meme and it's like looking for your summer bod, that kind of the baby. But I was like that, and I remember being at a conference with a load of other nutritionists, and we were all like at lunch, we're saying, did you see that picture? Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
There was a lot. Now my lads were grand, like they were they commented on it, but they were just like, nah, we're absolutely. I have to say that the lads that I work with are great. Nick, their S&C coach is fantastic. They've really bought into the nutrition. They are in great shape. But for season 1, the goal was to drop body fat because they came in like out of shape. Then after that, then it has been a process of gain muscle, get the body fat to a level where, like this player who said to me, I don't want to drop anymore, he has had season after season of hamstring niggles constantly. And we had a conversation about it, myself and the S&C, in the earlier stages of this season, and we were saying, I said, I just don't think he's robust. I actually don't think he's robust enough. So but we had to get the player to buy into that as well. So bit by bit, now he went the whole season without getting injured. It has never happened as long as I've been there.
Saying to him, at the moment in this state, he's not robust enough, but we can get you to a state where you're going to be robust enough.
Yeah, no, we didn't say to the player, you're not robust enough.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, oh wow.
Now sometimes I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I say to, a little whippersnapper could come in from the under-20s, and I'd say to him, I don't want I don't say to him, you don't have enough muscle, or you don't have, I'd say you're probably not robust enough for a senior at the moment, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I love that sentence there though, because you're probably not robust enough as a senior at the moment.
Yeah.
So you've said, my perception is you may be, I don't know, but also at the moment, so you have scope to improve and you will likely get better.
And to be fair, with guys, they're very aware if they don't gain muscle at a fast rate, or they struggle to gain muscle. I've had players who said to me, I just cannot gain muscle, Amy. And I just say, well, sit down and watch. And I say to them, I guarantee you by the end of the season, you'll have gained muscle. Like, you do it consistently, you do it properly, you'll do it. It's not impossible. But yeah, so this particular player, anyway, as I said, he was uninjured for the whole year. Like, played unbelievable. He was best player of the squad for the whole year. And it's great. It's great to see that. It's great to have the players. I'd hate to come into a team just for a year. You're not going to do it. You'll have beginner's luck. You'll have the principle of initial gains and diminishing return. You'll have all of that come in. But actually, if you want to have long-lasting changes, you have to be there for a couple of years.
And that player as well has bought in and saw the value in what he's been doing, because, as you said, he hasn't become injured.
And players talk. So they're saying in the dressing room, they're, Jesus, no, I don't want to say that to you, but you haven't got injured, or Jesus, you're after getting fairly big. What have you been doing? And he's, I check in there with Amy every week, or I've been doing my S&C stuff. Like, I'm flat out in the gym whenever, And then they're kind of, Amy, can I arrange a check-in with you?
Yeah.
Or they're like going to the S&C, can I get a new program? Or, or they don't even have to ask that. They just start to kind of row in, So it's like, but in saying that though, it all does come down to the management.
Yeah.
Who's at the helm? And do they buy into what your philosophy is? Like, I've been so fortunate, particularly with Tip, that the manager believes in the people he brings in, but believes in whatever philosophy that they have. You chat to him about it. And when they buy in from the top, the players are less likely to kind of waver off track. But you do see it. I've seen it from colleagues of mine who work with teams where the manager treats their service as a tick the box, and then the players will treat it as a tick the box. You know, so like, just say for example, this season, something as simple as we would sometimes have players that would travel to meet us in the hotel instead of coming on the bus because of where they live or whatever, or maybe where they're working. And I tend to not give out to players on match day. I will rip them a new one at training, but on a match day I tend to just leave it as football. But these three players kept consistently coming to the pre-match meal about 5 minutes late. 5 minutes now, not a huge margin, but still 5 minutes. And the manager said to me...
My players are laughing at the moment.
What?
My players that are listening are laughing at the moment when
Yeah.
you said 5 minutes, because I'm very much if you're not early, you're late. This
is the thing. So the manager said to me, because he knew I wouldn't say anything to them because it was a match day, but he said to me, you can say to them that if they're not here, they're going to have to travel to Tipperary and get the bus up in future, because 5 minutes late is 5 minutes late. And that then, you know, it does like manifest into other things, you know. So I did, you know, but the reason I'm using that example is just to show the level of buy-in. Another manager could be like, it's only 5 minutes, you know.
But the difference is, and very careful here, and I'm saying this for a reason, it was consistency and consistently 5 minutes late. Yeah. If it's a once off 5 minutes, or even a once off 20 minutes late and something's occurred, that is absolutely grand. Do not worry about it.
Yeah.
Like I heard on a podcast recently, people giving out about there being no crack in Club GAA anymore, and I heard about a lad that was 15-20 minutes late and got a roasting when he got there. The issue isn't that the person is late on a once off. Like, that's not club wide, nationwide. You're not going to be getting a roasting or a ribbon for being 20 minutes late once off. It's when you're consistently late because it's appraised as somewhat of a lack of respect for whoever's working with you, as well as your teammates, and a little bit yourself as well, in that you're consistently not appraising that it is important to be here on time for the rest of the team and for yourself and for your coaches, because your time is more valuable than someone else's. And that's when it kind of needs to be culled. But it's not a roasting or a ribbon or an authority of don't do that again or you're off the panel or whatever. It's a conversation first. And it's, look, is it possible for you to be here at an earlier time? What would we have to do in order to get you here? And it's guiding the athlete and helping the athlete to put themselves in a better position for success, rather than goading them into doing it, because they have to want to do it at the end of the day as well. And if they don't want to do it, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Just don't bother.
Well, and look, it does come down to, like, I just have an example in my mind now about two different players. Both of them used to arrive late, you know, they were late. Like, they were on time, but they were late.
Yeah.
One player would bust his gut to get to the pitch, you know, because our dressing room is a little bit further away from the pitch, but the other one would just saunter up like, you're lucky to have me here.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really funny though, because the player who sauntered up, I remember the first consultation that I ever had with him, and he knew it all. But yet his body fat was really not where it needed to be. He basically said to me, like, you know, what would it take for you to adjust these skinfold results on your laptop? You know, this sort of come on, I'm a great footballer, you don't really need to. And that was probably my first kind of backlash at a player. I was like, sure, you know it all. Why are you bothered? Like, you know it all. And I was a bit more ill-tempered than I'm saying now, like, because I was kind of like, don't undermine me and don't undermine the service, and also don't
undermine your teammates.
Yeah, I was kind of saying, but sure, you know, why are you here? So
yeah, you play the game on your own.
But he, to be fair, he kind of was like, he then from that day on had this huge respect, because I just hopped off him. You know, we're all here like for the same reason, so don't let on you're this higher god, like. But it was funny though, because when then in other areas of the team, they would still have found that I just do my own thing, I don't need. And they were saying, how did you get the buy-in from him? Well, I wasn't going to say, well, chew him up and spit him out. I wasn't going to say that's how I got there, but you just had to know how to navigate around his ego. and then literally had the,
and then positive reinforcement to that ego later on. You're doing
Yeah.
so well.
Yeah.
You're amazing. You're great.
And you'd always have the joke. You'd say, but you know that.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know you're doing well. And I remember that first season, he was like, I remember giving him a target, and he was like, I remember the manager saying to me, Jesus, is that target? I said, he'll do it. And lo and behold, he hit that target. He was so delighted. And actually, where it came from, I actually think, was the cockiness was masking the disbelief in himself, you know. And then when you feel like you're gathering momentum to prove yourself, you know, it was fascinating. And he was an incredible footballer. Like he was a great person to have in the dressing room, aside from the swagger that could come sometimes. But when you were able to kind of channel it in the right way.
I've experienced with a lot of athletes like that, and I've spoken about it on the podcast previously, in that mask can go up because of insecurity.
Yeah.
I'm class. I'm deadly. I'm unreal. Look at me. I'm deadly.
Yeah.
And it's really like, oh, maybe I'm not deadly. I'll just let on that I think I'm deadly so that nobody questions it.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll believe it in time. Whereas if that works for you, okay, but you probably intrinsically, internally need to change that a little bit and not have to fake it. So you want to change it within yourself as an athlete. Do the things that are going to increase the chances that you're going to feel confident. And then if you do those things and you feel more confident, then it'll probably manifest in a slightly healthier way than just fobbing off everybody else and telling everybody you're deadly all the time.
Yeah, and you know what though? I do think when you are part of a squad that's led by a professional setup, that becomes found out very quick and you become very vulnerable. And that's okay, because you also have the support for that too, you know. So it's, you're always going to find different characters. Like I've been lucky, I've never worked on a team where there's been divas or dickheads, or, you know, I've never had too much of a challenge, like in that respect. Like I get challenged all the time and I love it, where players are asking you questions because they're enthusiastic but I've never had someone who thought that they thought they were too big for their boots.
They're above it.
Yeah. Nobody that I used to dread meeting them at training, because I'd say, oh, to deal with this lad now or this girl now, or, you know, I've been lucky. I don't know, is it that I have a personality that I'm just able to get around people, you know. I had, like, before one of my initial roles, like I've been in management for a long time, you know, so I've been kind of used to dealing with people for a long time, whether it's from a leisure centre perspective. Then classroom management is a different thing as well, you know. And now, as my new role now, like you're managing a whole department, like, so it's, you know, that's just, I think it's just
managing people is a strength.
Yeah, it's just something that kind of.
But it's probably developed over time as well.
Oh, I'd say so.
Yeah.
I would definitely. I think so. My emotional intelligence has definitely improved, and
through experience.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. So and that's life. Like, you know, me in my 20s versus me in my 30s. Yeah, a lot of difference. I probably would have been I was definitely a lot more hot-headed in my 20s.
But don't worry, I have a question for you on that topic later on. But just to touch on what we spoke about there in regards to getting to training early, I thought it important to just reflect